Welcome everybody. So, this is a really interesting show at an interesting time at the Whitney. This particular show is drawn from the collection, and it's of early 20th century modernism, which is basically the kind of innocent response to things that were going on in Europe, that the artists in America were really excited about what they were seeing happening there. Many of them traveled to Paris and traveled to Germany and saw the kind of revolutionary work that was going on there, and came back to America and really kind of responded to that. I'll read a little bit of what I've got here. This show showcases work produced between 1900 and 1930 by well-known American modernists, and they're now largely forgotten, but equally groundbreaking peers. Drawn from the collection, it provides new perspectives on a myriad of American artists using non-representational styles developed in Europe to express their subjective responses to the realities of the modern age. America's early modernists came of age during a time when the country's predominant mood was one of youthful confidence. Racial violence, social and economic injustice existed, but so too did insurgencies and social reform. American technological and engineering ingenuity had made the world's largest industrial power. At the same time, the political progressiveness and cultural shifts, such as women's suffrage, had suspended the bourgeois codes of respectability. This combination gave rise to an excitement about the era. So, with this backdrop, it really was a very innocent, enthusiastic embrace of what these artists saw going on around them. So it was a much smaller world at the time. The artists who were really kind of cutting edge at the time were, a few hundred, a couple of thousand in the whole country, really. So it was a much smaller scene where there are hundreds of thousands of artists that are in the world now. This was a much tighter group, and they really cross-pollinated. They influenced each other in many ways. So I'm going to move on to 1912. Arthur Dove became one of the first American artists to publicly embrace modernist abstraction, exhibiting a radical series of pastel drawings, including this one, at Alfred Stieglitz's 291 Gallery in New York. With a vocabulary of overlapping and interlocking organic forms, these works portray the universal rhythms Dove sensed in nature. Calling his technique extraction, he sought to distill the inner essence of his subjects rather than analyze their outer physical form. I would rather look at nature than try to imitate it, he remarked. And you can see a couple of his pieces. The Distraction is from 1929. So, basically stylistically, you can see that it's an evolution, but not that different. He was still dealing with the same kinds of ideas. Okay, Albert Bloch, born in 1882, died in 1961. In Mountain, Albert Bloch used intense color, the faceted forms of cubism, and the image of a solitary figure walking up a hill towards a distant church to symbolize humanity's journey to higher spiritual realms of consciousness. He decided to forego realism in favor of employing non-naturalistic form and color to communicate feelings. So in fact, Bloch was the piece on the right is Mountain. On the left is a Kandinsky early improvisational piece. He was doing these folklore pieces at that time, and the other one is Franz Marc, the horse. They actually founded a group, a German expressionist group called the Blue Rider, and they asked Bloch to participate in their first show. So it was very interesting because he was part of that movement. And when he came back to America, he continued in this vein. Okay, so I just wanted to show, the roots, the pillars of modernism. Basically, post-impressionist notions came out of Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Cézanne. And the artists in America saw this work. They actually, Alfred Stieglitz, I'll talk more about him, really championed modernism in America early in the century. He started doing shows in, I believe it was 1908, and one of the first shows that he did was a Cézanne show, who hadn't been shown a whole lot at that point in America. Okay. Yun Yi is a Chinese immigrant, and basically he was an integral member of the San Francisco avant-garde. He really embraced modernism. His paintings of San Francisco's Chinatown, such as Street Scene, which is the image on the right, combined cubist structure with a high-key palette, rhythmically balancing the color forms to inflect the scene of everyday life. Basically, one of the things that I wanted to say is based on what the artists were seeing, they kind of integrated in America Cubism and the Fauve, the more expressionistic bright color and the kind of Cubist approach to structure. All this comes out of Cézanne again. Okay. And in 1913, there was the Armory Show. I've talked about this before, but this was a huge, huge change. It really integrated European avant-garde and American, the most advanced painting in America, and they showed Matisse, they showed Picasso, a lot of Cézanne, and really it outraged the critics and many of the public, but it was a great inspiration for American artists, because it shattered a lot of the notions that they came up with in their academic training. You know, Nude Descending a Staircase by Duchamp was one that stood up to great ridicule. Also, Matisse's Blue Nude was also in this Armory show. And, you know, again, many in the public and many of the critics just didn't know what to make of all this. So it was really interesting, because up next to Kandinsky and Duchamp and Matisse were American artists who were kind of the cutting edge at the time in America. And here are two of them. William Zorach and his wife Marguerite Zorach were both in the Armory show. Both had works in the show. Now, William Zorach sounds like European, but actually he was born in America. They met in Paris, William and Marguerite, and William's name was really William Finkelstein. And when they got back to America, they changed the name to Zorach. It was much more exotic. So let's see. Bloomner. So Oscar Bloomner was German-born, immigrated to the United States, was painting these motifs, you know, Jersey Valley. So a lot of the motifs that he painted from were around where he lived in New Jersey. He did a show in, well, let me see, when was that? I think it was 1915 or 1914, with Stieglitz at Gallery 291. And it was a dismal failure. The critics criticized the work as being Germanic. And at the time, they were in the middle of World War I, so not a painting sold. It was very disappointing. Bloomner continued his work and has done really fabulous stuff, though it may not be an everyday name that you know of. That's one of the things about this show is Barbara Haskell, who's a curator, dug through the collection to pull out pieces by really, really well-developed artists who, in many ways, have fallen into obscurity. At the time, they were fairly well known, but you know, unless you're really paying attention, which I do, but so I knew Bloomner's work, but you don't hear a lot about Bloomner. Okay. Marston Hartley, on the other hand, is somebody who you hear a lot about. Hartley traveled to Europe in 1912, settled in Paris, where he quickly assimilated the fractured form of Cubism and the vivid colors of Fauvism. A year later, he relocated to Berlin, where he became enthralled with the city's crowds, the gay subculture, the military pageantry. Shortly after World War I broke out, Karl von Freiburg, a German officer in the Royal Guards, with whom Hartley was in love, was killed. Devastated by this loss, Hartley juxtaposed images of his that he associated with Freiburg to create an abstract portrait of him. By the time Hartley completed painting number 5, the series had become as much an abstract evocation of the German military and the tragic cost of war as a specific memory of Freiburg. So this is, you know, really showing the integration of abstraction, of pattern, of, you know, the chessboard, the iron crosses, the uniforms, the rhythms of this kind of militaristic emblem, but really kind of loosely put together into a composition. So there's a whole series of these paintings. So this is number 5. I believe there were 12 of them that happened in all. Kato is a Japanese immigrant. He landed in downtown Los Angeles, Little Tokyo. He sought to combine the soft focus, elusive qualities of pictorial photography with Japanese artistic traditions, utilizing notan, the Japanese method of massing darks and lights to flatten the image and emphasize its atmospheric quality. By featuring large areas of open space, he endowed photographs such as Bowl with Two Flowers from 1920 with a sense of absolute stillness, the emptiness of mind he associated with Zen Buddhism. So you can see that there are all kinds of integrated cultures that are happening in this early modernist movement. The Germans, the French, the Asian influences, all kind of combine. Okay. Blanche Lascelles was the most prominent member of a group of Massachusetts artists known as the Provincetown Printers. Founded in 1916, they developed the white line woodcut technique. This, which entailed incising a design into a single block of wood and applying color to the raised areas, resulting in a white line formed between each shape. So basically, you can see the flat planes of color that kind of transform the waterfront into this rhythmic interplay of shapes. What they would do is she would use French watercolor and apply that to each of these raised areas on the wood block, and then print it, all at once. So basically, it was all these colors were painted onto the block and then printed. So each print was a unique piece. There's a whole school of artists that were working in this technique, and most of them were women, actually, which is kind of interesting. All right, so we're gonna move along here. Okay, this is a wonderful Black artist who decided that she would go into textile design rather than trying to sell her work as an artist, because she felt that there would be too much prejudice and would have a difficult time, basically as a woman, as a Black artist, all that stuff. So she worked in the design area doing these fabric designs. But that, as she said, I realized I would have to think seriously about changing my profession if I were to be known by name. So she actually, at the time, designers were anonymous. So she kind of could get away with slipping in the back door of the art world. Okay. Now this is Robert and Sonia Delaney. And these were both, they were French artists. They really were very influential with the idea of using abstract color and form to evoke emotion. And they were working in Paris. They actually influenced people like Hans Hofmann, who knew them. And there were a group of American artists there at the time, and I am going to pull up Stanton McDonald Wright. And he went to Paris and really encountered modernism firsthand. He teamed up with another fellow, Morgan Russell, and they created a movement called Synchronism. Basically, symphony and chroma. So it's kind of the integration of sound and color, the idea of harmonics in color as a relationship to sound. They could induce emotional responses without really needing to do a narrative. Now, as things moved along, this particular piece is called Oriental Synchronomy in blue and green, and basically it's semi-figural. He was thinking of opium smokers, so you can see some figurative elements in it. Really beautiful color, beautiful technique. This fellow, had a long career. He came back to the United States and actually wrote books on color theory, which were very influential. Okay. All right. So this business of sound, of music, of how the synesthesia of form and color is something I've talked about before. And E.E. Cummings, we know as a poet, did you know he was a painter? He was a very developed painter, actually. And until about 1927, he was exhibiting. He actually began to focus more on his poetry in 27 and didn't exhibit after that. But you can see Noise number 13, this Charles Birchfield cricket chorus in the Arbor. And then again, back to Arthur Dove, who was somebody who I started this with. Dove was very much into foghorns and sound as an elemental force. In this case, it's Louis Armstrong, which I don't have a problem with. Okay, and Joseph Stella, another Italian-American artist, very much interested in the translation of music into form. So this was really a widespread notion, and it's still out there. I mean, the abstract expressionists painted to jazz all the time, and we're really thinking about that, and form and color and things like that are very much part of events that take place now. So it is something that from the early part of the 20th century, actually predating the 20th century, going back to Goethe and and his color theories and the relationship to sound was something that was being played around with back then. So I love these Stella pieces that, let's see. Oh, here's another one. Nativity. Now, and kind of unconventional approach to spirituality was definitely in the air. And Stella, as you know, as many others, took up this avenue of pursuit. Since some form of religion or spirituality has been involved in visual arts since the caves, it's not a surprise that it would adapt and come up in a different form in America. And here we go, music. Georgia O'Keeffe. And this is Henrietta Shore. Now, again, here's the gallery 291 connection. Once again, George O'Keeffe, who was one of Stieglitz's best sellers, his wife, and a very, very well respected artist, did a show together with Henrietta Shore. They were touted as feminine artists and all that, and it was a kind of diminutive remark, but their abstraction was really remarkable at the time, and they both were acknowledged as masters and cutting new ground. Henrietta Shore lapsed into great obscurity, where Georgia O'Keeffe held her own and still does. Henrietta Shore was born in Canada, came to New York and studied with Ashcan school leader and influential teacher Robert Henry. She moved to Los Angeles in 1912, but returned frequently to New York. Her knowledge about vanguard art being produced in the East Coast, combined with the modernity of her portraits and genre scenes, made her a key figure in the Los Angeles art scene throughout the 1910s. Back in New York in the 1920s, Shore radically shifted her style to symbolic and boldly simplified distillations of organic forms, as you see on the left. And the paintings debuted to great acclaim in 1923 in a mid-career retrospective at Ehrlich Gallery, and at the at a museum in Massachusetts. Worcester was actually, and still is, a pretty big museum. One of her greatest champion, one of the greatest champions was modernist photographer Edward Weston, who credited a 1927 visit to her studio with influencing his subsequent work. After he moved to Carmel, California in 1929, Shore relocated there a year later and soon began transforming the craggy coastline of Point Lobos into anthropomorphic landscapes, replete with metaphoric allusions. And here is one of those pieces that Henrietta Shore, that Weston would have seen something like this in Henrietta Shore's studio. And you can see how that there's a direct influence and direct relationship. Weston went on to great acclaim. A lot of his seashell forms you may have seen, but he also did the figure, and the way he abstracted the figure was directly related to this kind of abstracted notion. Okay. Agnes Pelton, I actually did a talk on Agnes Pelton. She had a show at the Whitney last year, I believe it was. And Pelton, as a teenager, studied with Arthur Wesley Dow, who also taught Georgia O'Keeffe. He was very much influenced by the notions of the Asian notions and the Chinese and Japanese, this idea of notan that I had been talking about earlier with the Japanese photographer. So Pelton's artistic breakthrough came in the mid-20s with a series of abstract paintings depicting subject matter such as air, light, water, and sound. In the decades that followed, she began to immerse herself in the study of esoteric and occult philosophies. Her imagery would evolve. She paired the emotive power of ethereal abstract forms with mystical symbols such as stars, mountains, fire, to represent the union with the divine reality that she experienced in her dreams and meditation. Pelton was among the artists who believed color could speak directly to the soul. She constructed her compositions out of multi-layers of smooth, thin glazes of paint to create a delicate, shimmering veil of color. Living away from the mainstream art world for most of her career, Pelton received little encouragement for her abstract paintings. Her greatest support came between 1938 and 1942 from artists in the short-lived Transcendental Paint Group in New Mexico, who shared her beliefs. Not until the 80s did her efforts come to fruition, really. And she's acknowledged now as a great painter, as in the Whitney gave her a one-person show, so that ain't bad. Okay, and again, Pamela Coleman Smith created what is actually still being used as the tarot deck of choice. She created this in 1909. So she expanded the deck itself. Many of the images just had numbers or symbols on them that weren't as elaborate as these. So this is actually a deck that's still in use at this point. Okay, to cut a break from the metaphysics and get back to some straight up painting, Patrick Henry Bruce worked from, I think, about 1908 until 36 in Paris. And this bold, simplified still life kind of typifies his work. It was very influenced by the Cubists, but he really simplified these things down into really bold forms. And again, not an unknown artist. Stuart Davis was very well known, was very from the 30s through the early 60s, was recognized as a great master. And you can see in his Egg Beater that he kind of pursued this humble object as a jumping off point into abstraction. But if you look at this other piece, which is from 1951, which is kind of outside the purview of this show, it kind of shows his evolution, though, into this kind of jazzy, mature style, integrating jaunty color and text. He's kind of a pre-pop pop artist. Okay. Aaron Douglas. This woodcut is a piece from a series that he did from basically Eugene O'Neill's Emperor Jones. And there's a whole series of these woodcuts. I was familiar with Aaron Douglas's murals, these really subtle, beautiful murals you can see on the right, lower, a series of murals that were done on the history of the Negro in America. And this one is the section on music, which is really beautiful, really subtle colors and all that. But he was a wonderful graphic artist. And really, I hadn't seen a whole lot of his woodcuts. I may have, but this show pulls out quite a few of these. There's a set of them in the show. And they're really powerful. He was a very good artist. And again, with the attention being paid now to the Harlem Renaissance and to earlier Black artists, Aaron Douglas has gotten more of his due. But again, really wonderful, subtle painter. Okay, and somebody that we went to the Noguchi Museum. So here is one of Noguchi's drawings that he did when he was in Paris. He got a Guggenheim grant and went to Paris and was the studio assistant of Constantine Brancusi, who also was another one who showed with Stieglitz at Gallery 291, which is fascinating. You know, Stieglitz was a remarkable fellow and championed a lot of really great artists, including this one, which is Charles Dumuth. Charles Dumuth, again, not an obscure name. He's somebody who many people know his work. There's a museum devoted to his work in outside Philadelphia, to the west of Philly. And again, you know, he was somebody who showed with Stieglitz. Stieglitz, the original Gallery 291 was functioning from about 1908 till 1917, and then he opened another gallery called An American Place, I believe it was. Yeah, An American Place, and that was operating from 1929 until his death in 1946. And you know, it's again, the list of artists that he showed were really the who's who of contemporary American artists at that time. Okay, and I'm going to leave you with two who are not too obscure. Calder on the one hand, and this is a really wonderful, buoyant page. I love this, you know, these two together. And John Marin, who you may or may not know, but from about the 30s until I'd say the late 50s, he was one of the best known American artists. He was on the cover of Life magazine. Basically he was a name that, like if you say Andy Warhol, everybody knows who that is. If you said John Marin at that time, everybody knew who that was. Wonderful painter. And I love this watercolor that I think is out. There's two different shows that are on there. One of them is this early modernism show, and another one is a show that goes from the 30s up into the 60s or 70s. The other show which is on at the Whitney is the Whitney Biannual. And you could not have more of a contrast between the innocent enthusiasm of this early modernism to the kind of sly, media conscious work that is in the Whitney Biannual. It's not to say that it's bad or good, it just is a very different time. And the awareness that is, in this early work, the enthusiasm that's in this early work is really quite exciting, and there's something there to see. As far as the Whitney Biannual, there are, as always, it's a mixed review on my part. There's some stuff that I really, really love there, and other stuff that, no, okay. Anyway, it is what it is. And if you get to the Whitney, definitely go see this show, and take a walk through the Whitney Biannual and draw your own conclusions. Okay, so in 2 weeks, we're going to do, I thought we were going to do Hopper this week, but in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing Edward Hopper. So they have a huge collection. The Hoppers donated their entire, Joe Hopper contributed the entire estate to the Whitney. So they have a huge collection to choose from. So should be good.
Okay. I love it that you give us your opinion of things. It's really nice because some of us are not that savvy. I'll go with someone, I say, oh, it's just like this,
Yeah.
Any questions? Does anyone have any questions? You could type it in the chat function or raise your hand. So we'll wait a minute or so. Sometimes, Larry, you're too thorough.
Okay.
All right, so I hope, by the way, I forgot to mention that tonight we're having our music in the courtyard. I don't know how I forgot it. 7:30 in the Chappaqua Library. If it's too humid and hot, we'll go into the air-conditioned theater, which seats 250 people, so you can easily socially distance. There will be refreshments supplied by the Friends of the Chappaqua Library, wine, cheese, cookies, that kind of stuff. And also, the group that's coming is a jazz trio, the Lou Pappas Jazz Trio. So I hope you'll come and enjoy it. You will see both of us there. Larry introduces the jazz and I introduce the program. So there you go.
It's been really good music, so come if you can.
Oh, the last weeks it has been, you mellow right out. You feel really good about everything. So I hope you'll all come. See you then tonight at 7:30. And then don't forget, we're having the Bollywood program on Wednesday, the 3rd at 7 o'clock, which is an online program. So we hope to see you at all these programs. Enjoy your weekend. Bye, everyone.